My beloved cousin, one of the things about him and my older brothers is they grew up just reading comic books. And they grew up in a day and age where comic books was not considered educational or fantastic reading. And so they read comic books and they hid when they did so. How could they have known it would become blockbuster movies,
Right.
million
No one
dollar
knew.
sellers? Would they have known that? Listen, this is Anne Marie, host of About This Life. About This Life is stories of hope and transformation. When we navigate change, faith, and becoming, it really gives us the inspiration of how we might go down a certain path that we may not have thought of. So I offer that for your consideration as I welcome my guest today, Mr. Jesse Holland. Hello.
Hey, how are you today?
I am well, thank you. I am well. Just before we started recording, I told you I'm one of those fangirls. I get gushy over celebrities, okay? I give you your honor, your praise, and all the things. I mean,
Thank
I'm
you.
talking to a C-SPAN journalist. I'm talking to someone who's covered the White House. You didn't just cover the White House, you covered the White House, the Supreme Court, and Congress back in
That's
the
right.
day. You
That's
did
right.
all the things. You are an author, and we'll get to Wakanda Forever on the moment. Okay. But what I want to start out with, I just want to get into a little bit of depth with you in terms of your background as a journalist,
Right.
turned professor. Okay. And my first question, growing up, whose voice shaped your world?
Oh, well, first of all, I want to say thank you for having me on the podcast tonight. I really appreciate it. It's so great to talk to you. Um, the best way to explain this is that I grew up on a small farm outside of Holly Springs, Mississippi. Both of my parents were public school teachers. My mother taught in rural Mississippi, and my father taught in downtown Memphis. So I come from a long line of teachers and farmers. So it was my parents' voice who was the most influential in my life. My mom actually started teaching when she was 18, and she taught for more than 45 years. But she also wanted to be a writer, and she
Mm,
had started writing when she was younger. But being in Mississippi in the 60s did not really make it conducive to be a black woman who wanted to be an author. And she also had four kids, which made it
yes.
hard for her to find time to write. But her desire to write, her desire to express her voice was passed on to me. She passed on most of her teaching genes to my brothers and sisters. It didn't hit me till I got older, but she passed on her writing gene to me almost immediately. I've always known I wanted to be a writer. I've always known that one of the things I love to do was read, no matter whether it was comic books or romance novels or adventure books or encyclopedias or frankly dictionaries. That love of reading definitely came from my mom. My love of comic books came from my dad. My dad started buying me comic books when I was around 4, 5, 6 years old. And just once he started buying me comic books, every penny I had went toward
Went to
buying more
comic books.
comic books. So, and it's one of those really weird things that you would think I would assume that my father bought me comic books because he liked comic books. I just thought he was just buying them to be nice to me. And I literally didn't find out for about another 30 years that my dad used to collect comic books because he never did it during any of my childhood or my adulthood. I never knew that he was a comic book collector. So I get the writing genes from my mom and I get the comic book genes from my dad.
So you were his excuse for a grown man
Well,
reading
you know
comic
what?
books.
But he didn't. He didn't buy. I have, I have never known my father except those first three comic books he's given me. I have never known him to buy another single comic book in my entire life. He read them when
Really?
he was young, and I guess he either aged out of them or he's. Well, frankly, once again, Mississippi in the '60s, it probably wasn't that easy to get them as a young black man. So when he bought me those comic books, I just thought he saw something. He said, "Oh, maybe he'll like this," and picked them up. It turned out that he had a bunch of them when he was young. And here's a cautionary tale for everyone who's a comic book collector: when your mother tells you to come get the comic books out of her house, go get them immediately
Yes.
because my dad had all of those original comic books. He moved to St. Louis, and his mother, my grandmother, said, "Come get your comic books out of my house." And when he didn't get there fast enough, she threw them all in the trash. All of these
Absolutely.
original Superman, Lone Ranger, Zorro, Spider-Man, all of them went into the trash. Which is why when I
Fantastic Four.
Fantastic Four, which is why when I moved out of my house, my mom's house, I literally got a moving truck and went and got every last one of my comic books except one box. I got one box of cheap ones still in my mom's house in Mississippi, but the rest of them I took with me. So I get my writing genes from my mom and my comic book genes from my dad.
That's a prophetic lesson there because that happened in my house too, because my brothers were devastated when the comic books disappeared.
Yep.
One of the things as a journalist, and you mentioned writing several times, is that there's a common through line that runs through everything that you write, and it has to do with culture. When did you know that culture was something worth reporting? Not just describing, but you literally and talk to us. You played different roles as a journalist, and the one thing that keeps coming up over and over is culture. Why?
I am glad you noticed that. You are one of the few people who have actually noticed that that was a common theme, no matter where I was, that I always went back to African American culture, no matter where I was. One of the things I will say about that is that, like I said earlier, I'm from Mississippi. In Mississippi, we
Mhm.
obsess over history. History is not past, history is today. The first thing we want to know when we meet somebody new is who is your people? Because
Mhm.
we want to know
Mhm.
where you come from and what your history is. So I've always been a bit obsessed about African American history and American history. So wherever I go and whatever I do, I'm trying to figure out how we got here and exactly what African Americans had to do to get to where we are now. Regardless if I'm writing about the White House or if I'm writing about Congress or if I was writing about like the presidential election, there is no facet in this country that African Americans have not touched. But many of those stories were never told or were
Yes.
sidelined. So I think part of my calling for years and still to this day is to find those unknown and untold stories and make them part of the American fabric. Now, one of the things that I've discovered over the years is that there are a lot of us, meaning African Americans, who know this history, but we know it orally. We tell it
Yes.
from person to person. But the problem with oral histories is that they can be changed. And when the last person who tells it dies, they get lost. The way that you make these histories permanent and part of the American story is to write them down. So I've made it part of my mission to find some of these stories, as many of these stories as I can, and find a way to get them down, written down on paper, to get them down on computer so they become permanent, so they don't get lost. This is how you build part of the American story, not by telling one person, but by writing it down and telling thousands and millions. So that's really what one of the things that I preach as well when I talk about writing. We all have these fabulous family histories. Just about everybody I talk to has somebody in their family whose story should be told. But
Yes.
telling it to each other at family reunions isn't good enough. Somebody has to write this stuff down so not only our family knows it, but everyone knows it. So that's one of the things that I've like carved my little area out of the world in, finding some of these interesting, these important African American and American history stories and writing them down so they're not lost when the last teller dies.
Absolutely. And I have to tell you, I was a grown woman, and I'm humbled by this because we know the pockets of history from the history books they teach in school, right? In terms of places. As a grown woman before I came to a full understanding that in every state in the nation, in every city, there is some sort of civil rights history that occurred in that city. And I need to thank Linda Harris for that. She's in charge of the Harriet Tubman Museum on the Eastern Shore. And
Mm-hmm.
just traveling with her to Alabama, it's amazing that every single place you go, there's a secrecy, almost a hidden gem that is there. Jesse, you are the author of Black Men Built the Capitol. Hello, somebody. Discovering African Americans in and around, is it Washington, D.C.?
Washington, D.C., yes.
And the Invisibles, the untold story of African American slaves in the White House.
Right.
Now, you just said why you feel it needs to be written down on paper. But make the connection for us with the Capitol, with the White House. Why that particular slice of life right there?
Okay, so once again, with me, everything comes back to Mississippi. So when I left Mississippi in wow 1994, and I moved from Mississippi to South Carolina, to Columbia, South Carolina. I stayed in South Carolina for about 6 or 7 years, and then moved to New York. And then from New York, I moved here to Washington, where I met my wife. I got married like maybe 3 years after I got here to Washington. So I flew my parents, and it was literally my grandfather's first airplane ride in his entire life. I
Hmm.
flew them from Mississippi to Washington, D.C., so they could meet my fiance and so I could take them around Washington, D.C. So I rented a minivan and I put my parents in the minivan and my grandfather and my brothers and sisters in this minivan and called myself doing a tour of Washington, D.C. So I drive them over to U Street. I drive them to Anacostia. I drive them to Georgetown. I drive them to the National Mall. I take them by the Capitol, the Jefferson Memorial, the Washington Monument, the Lincoln Memorial. This was back in the day where you could drive down Pennsylvania Avenue
Yeah.
and see the White House. And so I remember driving my parents back over. I lived in Anacostia. I remember drive on Mississippi Avenue to be exact. I remember driving my
Mm.
parents over to my house on Mississippi Avenue and saying, "So what did you think?" And thinking that I had done a great tour. And my mom turns to me and says, "I absolutely loved everything you said about the National Mall, but where are the black people?"
Yeah.
And I realized I had done a tour of the National Mall, all of these temples of democracy, and never once mentioned anybody black. But
Mm.
despite its want to be an international city, Washington, D.C. is a southern city, and there are no southern cities that were not built by African Americans in some shape, form, or fashion. Not in the original 13 colonies, at least. So I decided to start doing the research and finding what African Americans did on the National Mall. There's a lot of books about African Americans in Anacostia. There's a lot of books about
Mhm.
African Americans on U Street. There are a few books about the African American history of Georgetown, but there was no African American history of the place where everyone goes in Washington, D.C.,
In
which is the
DC.
National Mall,
Yes.
but there had to be some type of history there. So I made it my goal. After my mom said that to me, said I was going to make it my goal to find out the African American history of the National Mall. And I started talking to people in Washington D.C. and literally like the everybody I talked to was like, "Oh yeah, slaves built the White House and the U.S. Capitol." And I'm like, "Well, why can't I find this written down anywhere? You guys are saying you know this. You live here in Washington, D.C. You say you know it. Well, why isn't it written down?" And so, being a journalist, we don't just depend on somebody saying something is true.
Of course, we need the evidence of
We
the
need the
fact, right?
evidence. So I started looking in the National
Wait a
Archives.
minute. Let us process that. We need the evidence of
We
the
need the
fact because
evidence.
that's not what it is like today, right? In today's
Especially, I
world.
mean, especially if you're
Yes,
going to tell somebody their version of the American story is wrong and needs to
mhm,
be expanded, they're not going to just take your word for it. You need
right.
proof. So I
So we
started
needed
going
proof
to
back in the day.
Yep. I started going to like the National Archives, the architect of the Capitol, to the White House Historical Association. I started interviewing historians, and we were able to pinpoint the receipts in the National Archives where slave owners were paid for the use of their slaves in building the U.S. Capitol. We were able to
Mm,
pinpoint in the White House historical records where the designer of the White House, James Hoban, was paid to use his slaves to build the White House, build the original White House. So it rolled from there because it's not just the White House and the Capitol, it's the Smithsonian, it's the tidal basin. All of these things on the National Mall were actually built by African Americans. There are places on the National Mall that were actual slave markets that we've quietly sort of paved over, and no one really has talked about it until like the last decade or so. So when I found out all of this and found out there were these historians who knew these things, my first instinct was somebody has to write this down because
down.
when we pass on, if unless it's written down, those stories will pass on as well. So I spent I actually left my job at AP, and I spent a about 3 years researching and writing down everything that I could prove in Black Men Built the Capitol. Now, there are some stories that are still out there that about what African Americans did in Washington, D.C. in the past, but I only wanted to write things that I knew I could prove because all it takes is one mistake, and then somebody with nefarious purposes will try to discredit the entire work. So
Let me ask you
everything
this
in Black Men
question
Built the
then.
Capitol is I could prove is true.
Let me ask you this question. Given the way we see how evidence is covered, erased, um, and cover-ups occur galore, what was the challenge you found in doing all of this research? What doors were shut in your face? What doors were opened in your face? Because I'm sure there are people not happy about, okay, why you want to talk about that?
Well, you hit it right there on the head with that last statement. One
Mhm.
of the first barriers I ran into was in the publishing industry, the very first reaction I got to my book was nobody wants to read about this.
Mhm.
Why are you trying to say American history is wrong? Why do you think these people were important? You don't even know the name. These people didn't
Mhm.
even have last names. Why is this even important? It took me about 2 years to convince and a publishing company to take a chance on this book. The first publish, and actually, I ended up going with the second publishing company because the first publishing company, who just agreed to the idea that this book was worth it, wanted to turn it into a picture book. They didn't want any words; they just wanted
Oh.
photos. And I was like, no, that's not my vision of this.
Mhm.
And so it actually turned out, and this is a weird story. I did a lot of my research at the Library of Congress as well. And
Yes.
there was another African American from Mississippi named Ralph Eubanks who worked at the Library of Congress. And the guy who wanted to turn my book into a picture book asked me, since when I told him no, said, "Hey, do you know Ralph Eubanks?" I was like, "Well, no, I don't know Ralph." He's like, "You should meet him. He's from Mississippi." And Ralph and I went to the Starbucks. I asked him out to Starbucks on Pennsylvania Avenue near the Library of Congress. And Ralph is maybe about 10 years older than me now. Um, and I went over the entire concept of the book with Ralph. I showed him my proposal. I brought it to him because by this point, by the way, I should say I was on my 127th rejection.
Mm.
So I had been
Yes.
rejected everywhere, and I only had one person
Yes.
say yes, and that person wanted to turn it into a picture book. I said no to that. But I showed it to Ralph, and I told Ralph what I wanted to do. And once again, Ralph, being from Mississippi, knows about our obsession with history. And Ralph said, I know the perfect publisher for this book. Give me a week and I'll give you a call back. Literally the next week, a publishing company called me saying, Ralph Eubanks says we need to read your proposal. I sent them the proposal, and about 2 weeks later, I had my first book contract. So the first big barrier was that no one believed that anybody would want to read this. I finally found one publishing company who was willing to take a chance on it. Unfortunately, they're out of business now because this has been a while back. It was Globe Pequot Publishing out of Guilford, Connecticut, and they're unfortunately out of business now. But they took a chance. The editor was named Maureen Graney. She took a chance that this book deserved to be published. That was problem number one. I got over that hurdle, got the book published. Problem number two became a reaction from Washingtonians, which surprised me
Mm. Chocolate
because
City.
their reaction was, well, why are you, who are not from Washington, D.C., coming here and deigning to write about Washington, D.C. history? Why aren't you writing about Mississippi history? That's where you're from. And that reaction really surprised me when I got that because I was like, well, no one else has. And it's too important for it to be lost. If someone else had written this book, I would have written another book because I would have had the book that I wanted to read. That's one thing I always say to myself. I write books that I want to read.
Hmm.
And the only reason why
Hmm.
I'm writing them is because nobody else has. So I wanted to read a book about the African American accomplishments on the National Mall. And since I couldn't find it, I wrote it myself. And I was so amazing that I had people who were Washington, D.C. experts coming to me saying, well, you're not from here. Why aren't you writing this? Why are you writing this? Why isn't somebody who's from here writing this? And my only reaction was, well, they didn't. So I did.
So I'm going to.
Yeah, I mean, because once again, it was too important for it to be lost. And once I got over that hurdle, the biggest hurdle was from the rest of the American reading public who did not want their stories that they grew up hearing about the White House and James Hoban, the Irish designer, and hearing about the construction of the U.S. Capitol and hearing about Dolly Madison saving the painting of George Washington from the
Yes.
British. They didn't, these were stories they grew up on, and they did not want to hear that everything might not be the way that they were taught. They didn't want to hear there were African American contributions to the U.S. Capitol. They didn't want to hear that it was an African American slave that saved the painting of George Washington from being burned by
And
the
are
British.
these blacks and whites that didn't want to hear? Are they
Most
both
most of
color
those most of
complexion?
those were most of the African Americans I talked to were, once they got over that a Mississippian was writing about Washington D.C. history, they were glad that somebody is
Somebody.
telling these stories. Most of the reactions I got from everybody else was either we're so glad you're expanding the history of this country, or how dare you tell us that slavery had something to do with the White House and slavery had something to do with the U.S. Capitol? Because, of course, America is way beyond that. Why are you dragging this stuff up out of the past? And my reaction is always, it's the famous saying, those who don't learn from the past are doomed to
Doomed
repeat
to
it.
repeat it.
If we don't write this stuff down, if we don't learn
Mhm.
from it, it'll just happen again. So why are you afraid of someone saying, here's what really happened? So it was a interesting time. I actually had a few death threats. I mean, it was amazing that I ended up like on some Nazi Stormfront website about how this guy is ruining American history. I'm like, what are you talking about? You guys are Nazis. Why are you even worried about American history? But in the end, it was very well received, and it got me to the point where I learned a lot during that was my very first book. And if
And
you're
give us
right,
the title one more time.
Black Men Built the Capitol, Discovering African American History in and Around Washington, D.C. And if you're a writer, you'll understand my sentiment when I say this. That book actually is very hard for me to read now because that was me learning how to be a writer. So if I
Yes.
wrote that same book now, I would promise you it would be so much better. But that was me learning how to be a writer 25 years ago. So
And I
I
understand that. I can relate to that because I'm working on putting out my own book of poetry and letters. And I've been working on it for the past year because I keep looking at it and say it's not perfect, it's not perfect. And I'm convincing myself, just get the darn thing out. Just get
right.
it out. Just get it
For
published so that I can go on and say I can do the next one and the next one.
if you have a writer in your life and you want to torture them, show them something they wrote 10 years ago.
Yes.
that that is a way to torture them. So,
That is me.
but I learned so much writing Black Men Built the Capitol, not only about how to write, but about the things I care to write about. I had no problem spending 3 years researching and talking to people on this subject because it was a subject that I was interested in. Now, unfortunately, it was about this time when I that my daughter was born. So I actually had to go back to work at the Associated Press. So I couldn't immediately start on my next book because I had children and a mortgage and a wife who said, "You can't stay at home writing anymore. You need to go back to work." So I
You have
actually
a strong family, but before we get into your strong family and going back to the AP, what did you pledge?
Oh, I am a lifetime member of the illustrious Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated. I was made at the Eta Zeta chapter at the University of Mississippi in the spring of 1990, and I am currently a member of Chi Mu Nu, which is the Shanghai, China chapter of Omega Psi Phi.
And look at him, he's singing it all, saying it all proudful and everything. My brother's accused, so I had to let you get that shout out and
You know, I
tell
had to
us
shout
your
it out.
university too. Yes, he pledged at Howard many
Okay,
years
Alpha
ago.
chapter.
So many years ago. He was I was at Howard, oh, in the 80s. So he finished and I came in. So, but how did you feel when Marvel called? Oh my
That's
God,
also a bit of a
Marvel called. That's every that's every
that's
writer's
actually a
dream,
bit of
right?
a story as well. So you have to tell me
Tell
when to
us
be
the
quiet because
story.
all of these are a bit of, so I wrote Black Men Built the Capitol first. It took me about 10 years to get to my second book, which was The Invisibles, the untold story of African American slaves in the White House. But this is what I tell all writers. You want to put your best foot forward on everything because you never know who's reading. So
Mhm.
I finished The Invisibles, the untold story of African American slaves in the White
Mhm.
House. It actually started as my master's thesis. And so I finished my master's degree at Goucher College in Towson, Maryland, and then started rewriting my thesis into The Invisibles. I finally finished The Invisibles in 2015, and it goes out, it gets published, it's getting great reviews. Michelle Obama mentions that slaves were used. She lived in a house that was built by slaves at the Democratic National Convention in Philadelphia. I happened to be on the floor when she said it, and I was like, yes, somebody
Yes.
finally in the White House has finally acknowledged it. But that's a whole other thing. So I start doing talks about the Invisibles and Black Men Built the Capitol, and I'm still doing
Hmm.
talks about journalism. So I'm at LSU in Baton Rouge, staying in their alumni hotel, having just talked at a journalism symposium, and my cell phone rings. And it's an editor, not from Marvel, but from Lucasfilm. An editor
Okay.
from
George
Lucasfilm
Lucas.
calls me.
Hmm.
And she says, I just finished reading The Invisibles. It is an incredibly awesome book. I'm so glad that you wrote this. Have you are you a fan of Star Wars? Now, Star Wars literally was the first movie I ever saw in a movie theater.
The original, I hope.
The original the
The
original Star
original.
Wars was the first. My first grade teacher took the entire class to see Star Wars. I have no idea how she got away with that, but the entire class went to see Star Wars. I had the lunchbox, the curtains, the comic books, the whole deal. So I was like, "Yeah, I love Star Wars. I've seen Star Wars. I don't know how many times." She was like, and the editor was like, "Well, there's a new movie coming out called Star Wars: The Force Awakens, and
Mm.
there's an African American character in this movie called Finn. We need somebody to help us come up with a backstory for Finn. I loved how you wrote the Invisibles. I know you're steeped in African American history. We want this character to be as realistic as possible. Would you be
Wow.
interested in doing this?"
Oh, yeah.
Well, actually, I said no.
You
My
said
first reaction was no. The
no?
reason why is because I had just spent the previous 7 years working on the Invisibles. And my wife told me that I needed to take some time, spend some time with her and my children before I
Yes.
took on any other projects. So when Lucasfilm called, I said, this is something I would absolutely love to do, but no, because I promised my wife that I would take 3 years before I took on any more projects. They were like,
Gotta
well, if you
love
change your
family.
mind,
Yes.
call us back. We'd really love to have you do this. So I'm sitting once again in the LSU hotel. I hang up with Lucasfilm. I pick up my phone and I called my wife and I said, honey, this is how much I love you. Lucasfilm just called
Oh,
and they want me to work on a character from the new Star Wars movie. But because you said
sad.
I need to spend more time with you and the children, I said no.
No.
And the phone went silent. And then a few seconds later, she goes, you better call them back, you dummy. And so I immediately called them back. And that's how I got to write Star Wars The Force Awakens Finn story, which was my first novel. I had written history books, I'd never written any novels before. So they needed the book turned around like in this weird amount of time, which is like maybe like 4 months. So I
Hmm.
really just threw everything into it, and I had to get it out done quickly.
And
I had to
by
go
the
back.
way, 4 months is terrifying to a writer, but go
Yes,
ahead.
it especially a writer who is also working full time
And has
and
children.
has children and is going around giving journalism talks. So, but I did get it finished, and they loved it. So Star Wars: The Force Awakens Finn story comes out in 2016. So The Invisibles came out in 2015. Star Wars: The Force Awakens comes out in 2016. Soon as Finn's story comes out, I get a call from an editor at Marvel. And he says to me, I just finished reading Finn's story. It was great work. I went back and read The Invisibles. I absolutely love what you're doing. Have you ever heard of the Black Panther? Now,
Wow.
that is a ludicrous question to anybody right now. But in 2016, no, only real comic book fans knew anything about Wakanda, who knew anything about Black Panther. Luckily, I was a real comic book fan. I had all of the original comic books, the Fantastic Fours, the Jungle Actions. I knew who T'Challa was. I knew what. So when he said, "Have you ever heard of the Black Panther?" I was like, "Of course." I got those books in my basement. And so
Mm-mm.
he said, well, in a couple of years, there's going to be a Black Panther movie. What we're thinking about doing is we're going to split it up into three. Ryan Coogler is going to do the movie. Ta-Nehisi Coates is going to do the comic book. We want you to do the novel. Would you be interested in
Wow.
doing something like this?
I didn't know Ta-Nehisi Coates did was part of it.
Yeah, Ta-Nehisi Coates
Ooh.
did the comic book. So
Ooh.
but the one catch was none of us could talk to each other because they wanted three different visions of the Panther. So the thing I had to give up is I had to give up reading Marvel comic books because I couldn't
Mm.
have they didn't want anyone else's idea slipping into what I was doing because I was rewriting the Black Panther origin and they wanted to know what I would come up with instead of being based on what anybody else came up with. So
And
they
this is while the movie is being filmed,
this is
or
why this is why the movie. In fact, the book actually came out before the movie. So
mm,
they were so it was that's one of the greatest thrills that I've had is that I went to see the movie at the premiere in New York. I didn't get to go to the one in Los Angeles, which is one all of the stars were at. I
yes.
went to the one in New York where all the writers were. All the people who wrote the Black Panther comic book, they all went to the one in New York. So, and I'm sitting there watching the movie and it was amazing how many similar ideas Ryan Coogler and I had that showed up in the book versus the movie. Now, there are some places where we diverged quite significantly. His portrayal of Shuri and my portrayal of Shuri in my novel are two different characters.
And Shuri is the sister.
Right.
And we need to pause right here and just take a moment for Chadwick Boseman.
Yes, exactly. I was
Oh my God. I love ooh,
I was
chill.
incredibly honored to have met
Yes.
Chadwick uh, when he was doing his movie tour for Marshall. I
Yes.
actually got a chance to go sit down in a studio at the Associated Press and interview both him. I get interview him about his portrayal of Marshall and talk to him about all of the icons he had portrayed. Because just I
42.
mean, Black Panther was just one. He also portrayed James Brown. He also did Thurgood Marshall. He did Jackie Robinson in 42.
Robinson.
I mean, one man basically did the entire gamut of African American icons in a very short career, cut short by his death. And and it was so incredible meeting him. And most people ask the author to sign his book. I had Chadwick Boseman sign my
Right.
book
My book.
as T'Challa. So I have Chadwick Boseman's signing from King T'Challa to Jesse in one of my books here in my house. So
So there we go, collecting the evidence. But go ahead, finish your story about Siri and Ryan
right,
Coogler
right, right.
being in New York.
So I was lucky enough to be able to um, carve a part of Black Panther for myself. So once again, once the book was finished, I got to go back and read Ta-Nehisi Coates' great work on the Black Panther comic book. And then, of course, I've been obsessive about seeing all of the Black Panther movies, and was able to be at one of the premiere, the actual premiere for Wakanda Forever. But it was one of the greatest joys of my life was to be able to be a little part of the Black Panther story. But all of this is because I put my heart and soul into Black Men Built the Capitol and The Invisibles. If not for those two books, the rest of it would have never come.
You are a storyteller.
I, and you know what?
You,
That's what I tell people. In the end, no matter what else I'm doing, I
hmm
am a storyteller. What I do
You're
is
a
tell stories.
storyteller.
Even now as a professor, what I do is go in front of my class and I tell a story. Here's why, here's not just what you should do, here's why you should do it. Because keep in mind, and I mean, it's obvious once I say it, but
hmm
we as human beings, the very first way we learn in our life is through stories. Back when we
Yes.
can't read, how we learn is we sit at our mom and our dad's feet or at grandma and grandma's feet, and they tell us stories. No matter whether the story is of the itsy bitsy spider, or the
hmm
story could be of Red Riding Hood,
Or
or John
Nancy.
Henry, or stories in church of David and Goliath, or stories.
hmm
How we learn is through stories. It's one of the most enduring forms of human education. So back when I said earlier that my mom got to pass all of her teaching genes on to my brothers and sisters, it turned out that I've always been a teacher. I just teach in different ways. I teach through stories instead of through books.
Yes. Yes. Yes, and amen. You've mentioned your family several times. And to do all that you do, first of all, giving all honor and glory to God because I hear evidence of God throughout this because it has to take a certain level of tenacity to go through 127 rejections and a final publisher and to be so committed.
Let me just interrupt you really quickly.
Yeah.
And I am petty enough that I still have all 127 in a briefcase, literally here in this office with me.
Yes. And so you get to say to yourself, see, if
See?
only you believed. But the most important thing is you believed in you.
Exactly.
I imagine during those moments when you're wondering, is it all worth it? Having a strong family support system right there by your side is
Exactly.
definitely a godsend. A godsend. Um, what do you want your children to walk away with in terms of what dad has done, all these things and contributing to the culture?
Well,
Um,
let me say this. If there is something that will ever keep you humble, it is your children. Your
yes,
children do not
I
care,
care.
do not care that
They do
you wrote Black Panther. Your
not.
children do not care that one of
Uh-huh.
your books was named one of the top history books of the year. They do
hmm
not care at all. You are still dad. You are a dork. You are a nerd. You are cruel and evil for not letting me stay up past midnight. I'm like,
I'll have
hey,
my friends over.
exactly, exactly. But I will tell you, I both of my children, my daughter Rita, graduated Elizabeth Seton High School last year, and she went on to Kansas State University, and she will be a sophomore next year in their master's program in urban planning and design. My son graduates DeMatha Catholic High School Oh, Friday. This
Yes,
Friday.
I saw the pictures.
This Friday.
Yeah.
And he's
The
gonna go
senior
on
pictures.
and he's going to go on to George Washington University as a chemistry major. So neither one of them want to do what I do, but luckily
Hmm.
they have their mom's brains and they're going on in industries where they'll be completely successful because I told them eventually your dad's going to want to retire and just right and somebody's going to have to support me because my wife is going
Absolutely.
to be tired of it. So you guys got to go make real money so you can give your father a grant so he can keep writing.
Yeah, and the mortgage gets paid.
Exactly.
Um, so I've got a question for you
Yes.
on a little on the serious side.
Okay.
How do you prepare your children for a world that will sometimes misread them without stealing their joy? One's already in college, one is about to embark on college. How do you prepare them for inevitably what are the experiences are to come being a Black person
Mm-hmm.
in this country that we live in?
And this is something that my wife Carol and I have talked a lot about because we grew up in completely different ways. My wife is from Fort Washington, Maryland, here in the DC area. She grew up as a suburbanite. I grew up in the middle of nowhere, Mississippi, where my high school had only four white graduating seniors. The entire class was Black because none of the white kids in the neighborhood went to the public schools. They all went to the private schools. And only the white kids who were too poor to go to the public schools, I mean, to go to too poor to go to the private
The
schools,
private
they
schools.
were the only ones who went to the public schools. So I grew up in a pretty much all Black system. And then I went to the University of Mississippi, went to Ole Miss, which was pretty much all white. And I did so purposefully because I knew the world would not be like how I grew up, where
Mhm.
the mayor was Black and the sheriff was Black. I mean, we lived in a pretty much Black enclave in Mississippi. So I knew the word, especially in the industry I was going into, journalism, that industry was not going to be all Black. So I needed to learn how to operate in the world as it existed, not the world that we wished it was. So I
Mhm.
went to Ole Miss. My kids as well grew up in Prince George's County, Maryland, which is a pretty much all Black enclave as well.
Yes, it
Prince
is.
George's County is one of the, if not the wealthiest African American county in the country, where all of their schools have Black teachers. All of the pharmacists are Black. All of the doctors are Black. All of the dentists are Black. So they grew up in a system just like I did. And my wife and I were very concerned about how they were going to assimilate into the real world, which may not be all Black for them. So one of the things that we did is the exact same things my parents did for me. We made sure, and my parents made sure that we were confident in who we were first.
Yes.
Well, no matter
Yes.
what anybody else says about you, if you have your home base, well, if you have your integrity and you know yourself, your history, where you come from, what you need to do, and where you are going, then it matters a lot less what everybody else wants to think about. So we try to do the same thing for our kids as well. We didn't stop with whatever their schools taught them. We talked about history and politics and sports and culture to them at the dinner table. We made sure, just like my parents did for me, we
Yes.
made sure each one
Yes.
of our children learned a foreign language, learned
Hmm.
a instrument, and played a sport. Because that way they have a great foundation. So now when they go out into the world, they don't have to worry about feeling inferior to anybody because they've never been inferior. that if you try to make them feel inferior, I told them to
Good
laugh
luck
at
with
people
that.
like, yeah, good luck with that because you've done things and you've learned things that few human beings have. It's always a running joke that, especially around here, that people look down on people who speak broken English, but the truth is anybody speaking broken English most likely speaks one more language than you do.
Yes.
So
Yes.
you cannot judge people by how they look or how they speak, and even if you do, you should always realize that that person might know something you don't. And that's where I want my kids to be. I want my kids to be confident enough in themselves, what they know, what they want to do, and where they're going. So when they go out into the world, when my daughter goes to Kansas and by herself, I don't have to worry about her being intimidated by anybody or thinking that she doesn't belong there because she has as much or if not more than other people. When my son shows up at George Washington, I don't want him to be intimidated by somebody who says, "Well, I did this and that in high school." I'm like, "Dude, you're captain of the cross country team. You're in the National Honor Society. I mean, you're first chair tuba. You play two different instruments. You
Hmm.
swim. You run track.
Yes.
You don't have to feel intimidated by anybody." And that's what my parents did for me. When I left home, I was confident in who I was and what I could do. Of course, I was still 17, and
Hmm.
17-year-olds are stupid, but at least I had a grounding on who I was, and I didn't have to worry about anybody successfully making me feel inferior. So that's what I would say to anybody. And also making sure you have, and don't not to get a good bit preachy here, making sure you have that good grounding in a black church where you see other people like yourself. The one thing that I see happen to a lot of African American students is that they leave home and their base around them is all of a sudden fractured. They don't see anybody else like them anymore. But you always should find your people. For a lot of us, we find our people at church. We find our people in Divine Nine organizations. We find our people in clubs and groups. You get around people who want the same thing you do. And that will give
Absolutely.
you that base and that grounding that you can survive just about anything.
And that's how you find your tribe. And Pastor Howard John Wesley at Alfred Street Baptist Church. There isn't enough we can say about how wonderful that church has given back and does for the community. And one of the things is the opportunities that it allows for young people to take the stage, including this past Sunday when the seniors, including your son, get to declare where they're going. And that is also part of the foundation that a lot of people might have church hurt. But you know what? It's analogous to this idea that if you go into a restaurant and you have a bad meal, you don't stop eating. You don't
Right.
stop eating now.
Right.
You just go someplace else.
You just go someplace else.
You go
Exactly.
someplace else. And so, church and that spiritual foundation is essential for the character of the man or woman who you are and who you're going to be. I just want to wrap up our conversation because you've lived a life that is full of color, full of joy, full of family and spirituality. And here you go starting something else. Hopefully your wife said yes. So I'm like, And then you called it Haraka Run and Walk. And I'm like, Haraka. You got to break that down for us. Haraka, Haraka. What does Haraka mean?
Okay,
What is that all about?
if you had said that owning a running specialty store was on my bingo card 5 years ago, I would have told you you are lying. Well, Haraka Run and Walk is Prince George's County's first and only running specialty store. So Haraka is the Swahili word for speed, faster, quick. So when, as I said earlier, my son was captain of the cross country team at his high school. My wife, Carol Holland, actually ran track at Eleanor Roosevelt High School and then won the NCAAs in Division II at the 800-meter race while she was at the Naval Academy. So we've been track parents our entire lives. But even though Prince George's County is one of, if not the wealthiest African American county in the country, there were no places you could buy running shoes anywhere in the county. For those people who wanted real running equipment for their children. We had to drive to Baltimore, to Annapolis, to Alexandria, Virginia, or to downtown DC to buy running shoes. And that doesn't make any sense when you have runners like Quincy Wilson, who the
Olympics.
youngest member of the US Olympic team on the
Yeah,
track and field team,
16 years old.
he lives here in Prince George's County and can't buy running shoes here. So my wife and I, we were actually at Alfred Street Baptist Church after having dropped our children off for practice in the Jackie Henry Green Orchestra. And we were waiting for them to get out of orchestra at the Starbucks right up the street, and there was a running magazine that said there was this organization called the Running Industry Diversity Coalition had done a study, and while there were millions and millions and millions of runners of color, the running industry itself was almost 98% white. And they were
Mm.
looking for African Americans who were willing to take a chance on opening a running store, and they were having a competition of who had the best idea for a running store. So my wife and I looked at each other and said, "This is exactly what we've been talking about,"
Yes.
and we were like, "We got to try it." And so we came up with the idea for Haraka Running Walk. We made sure that we based everything here in Prince George's County, and we actually beat out more than 100 other ideas to get this grant. We opened Haraka Running Walk the day Christmas Eve, actually Christmas Eve of 2025. So we've been open about 6 months now. So we're going through our first running season now, and it's been absolutely the support we've gotten from parents like ourselves in Prince George's County has been incredible, because many times the DMV, the District of Columbia, Maryland, Virginia, is such an awesome place, but sometimes people forget about Prince George's County. Prince George's County sometimes can be the last place to get something. We're the last ones to get a Trader Joe's. We're the last ones to get a Harris Teeter.
Hmm.
We were the last ones to get a running specialty store. But this county is incredibly awesome and deserves the same services as everywhere else in the DMV. And
Yes.
we're glad we're able to serve our one little part of it, which is going to be the runners, joggers, and walkers here in Prince George's County and other places in the DMV.
And I'm glad that it's Black owned. And one of the things that you and your wife have done by starting or opening this store is you are now building community. We've come full circle because you
Right,
grew up in community in Mississippi.
right.
And so now we are full circle because on Wednesdays there's a run walk. I promise to come out one day.
Come
I
out
don't run, but
while it's
I
still
can walk.
pretty. It's still pretty right now. Okay, so what I am literally the reason why the store is Haraka Run and Walk because everyone doesn't run. I'm not a
Yeah,
runner. Just let me just tell your audience, if you see me running, you need to start running too because something's chasing us.
something's wrong.
I am a walker. So what we do every Wednesday night at 7 o'clock, we do a 3 mile walk from the store. It's at your own pace. And then we start at the store. We walk on a nice trail called a Rhode Island Avenue Trolley Trail. We walk down a mile and a half and we turn around and we walk back. And then we go to Bus Boys and Poets for the Haraka Happy Hour.
Yes, I love my
Now,
busboys and poets, but I want to offer this challenge to my girl track sisters as
yes,
well. And you met us that Saturday morning,
that's
but
right.
girl track is all over. It's all over Prince George's County. I don't know how many crews are in there, but you might want to consider to come down to Haraka and see what is being offered because when we want to get our Brooks and all of our different shoes. We're going, like you said, all these different places.
Right.
So for my girl track sisters, let the sisterhood come out
Come
to
on out.
Haraka Run and Walk and even join you on a Wednesday.
And
So
yeah, just really quickly, there are some people who do want to run. So for those people who want to run, we've now started a Friday morning run called Fast Forward Friday. If you don't want to walk and you want to run, you can meet us at the store at 6 a.m. on Friday mornings. We do a 3.5 mile run. We call it party pace. Nobody will get left behind. That's one thing about
yeah.
running groups. Sometimes some running groups are really fast and people get left behind. We don't leave anybody behind. That's our mantra for our whole community and for our whole store. Nobody left behind.
Nobody left behind, and it is community. So, Jesse Holland, I want to thank you for being my guest today. I want to thank you for bringing a little, you brought history, you brought research, you brought family, you brought fatherhood, and you brought health, well-being in terms of that. How do people get in touch with you?
Well, you can always get in touch with me at Haraka Run and Walk. My email address there is Jesse, Jesse, at Haraka, HARAKA.RUN. Or you can get in contact with me on any of my social media. I'm on pretty much every social media platform under either Jesse J. Holland or author Jesse J. Holland. And you can always get in contact with me on my website, which is www.jessejholland.com.
Okay, so thank you. And I just wanted to also come back to another full circle. I mentioned to you my cousin. I'm not going to mention his name yet until I get the blessing of the family. And if so, I'll add a memoriam in the show notes. But my cousin just recently passed a month
Oh, my
ago.
condolences.
Thank you. And I just remember his enthusiasm with reading about superheroes and all of that. That's part of my childhood. I remember about him and gone way too soon. So, I dedicate today's episode to him. Um, he meant the world to us, to the family. So, cheers, I
Yep.
guess, to my cousin. And I would like to say to everyone, in terms of About This Life, we're bringing to you new stories, new examples. We're going to have new segments. We're going to bring a little bit of poetry in the mix, okay? Because I'm a poet and I love the students that I've been able to coach, and there's some phenomenal poets in the DMV. They will have an opportunity to be here and are welcome to be here. If this episode resonates with you in any form or fashion, please share it with the world, and go ahead and subscribe to About This Life, where we are changing our lives one day at a time. Thank you, everybody.